Hi.
I'm excited that you're finally in the hot seat. You're also a podcast host. I'm excited to have you here today. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me. This is relatively new for me because I'm usually on your side of the table.
I know.
But I love doing these things. So thanks for having me.
I'm going to put you in the firing line today. Just kidding. So Lance you're a big deal. And I would kind of place you probably as a candidate for the next Toronto mayor. You are super, super well connected. You've done an incredible job so far with your career. I'm really excited to chat with you today.
I'm super excited to chat. I'm so great that we had the chance to meet, not too long ago, and now we're here and chatting, and I love it.
And we had a really great conversation at Soho House in Toronto through our friend Astrid. Bless Astrid, amazing person.
Bless her.
And I'm really excited today to dig into kind of the intersection of traditional media because you really sit at the throne of Canadian luxury media, in my opinion. Do you want to kind of maybe start with your story and what you do?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on how far back you want me to go because I can
go as deep as you want.
So basically, I started... Well, okay, so I didn't actually go to school for media or journalism or any of that stuff. I actually was a biochem major. And I quickly... You were a biochem major?
No, okay.
I quickly, very, very quickly discovered that was not meant to be my destiny because it just absolutely ruined me during school. So I made a pivot into actually business marketing.
Cool.
And... long story short, that eventually led me to taking on an internship in Toronto because I'm from Alberta. And I really wanted to pursue a career where I could be in front of people, meeting people, learning new things all the time. I didn't know what that meant, but eventually that that landed me in an internship at another magazine in Toronto that was kind of also a startup as well. So I stayed there. This will date me a little bit, but at that time for my internship requirement, I had to write a paper on a subject matter that would help out my employer. And at that time, social media was just starting to be used as a business tool. So I wrote my 100-page paper on making a case for why businesses should use social media, which is crazy because if you don't now, it's just, what are you even doing?
Yeah.
So that eventually, I guess, was helpful for them because then they hired me to be a social media manager for them and then eventually became an online editor. Left for a little while to freelance after about 3 years with them. And then that landed, that was for only about 6 months, actually. It was pretty short. And then I ended up meeting my current colleague, who's the owner of our media company, through a friend of ours. And since then, I think I've been there for 8 years, maybe. It's just kind of all blurs together. And we've been building and chipping away at the block for all that time. And we used to be only a physical magazine that was distributed on the Bay Street corridor in Toronto, kind of like the financial district here, strictly B2B. And really our vision was to repackage what media could be and could mean and position it as a consumer lifestyle publication and media brand that really focused on this intersection between business and culture because at that time we were noticing that entrepreneurs were becoming... There was this big groundswell with the dialogue and discussion around entrepreneurship, and entrepreneurs were becoming the new rock stars. This is when you had all these conversations around, unicorn companies and people raising tens of millions and hundreds of millions of dollars for their companies. And so it was really felt like this kind of like this golden age of entrepreneurship as a cultural phenomenon. And we weren't talking about business in the way that we were talking about it before. We were talking about it through a pop culture lens. And so... one, we wanted to reframe what business could look like. Two, we wanted to really reposition that the face of business in Canada is very diverse and is not limited to your typical kind of, guy on Bay Street in a black or blue, navy blue suit. entrepreneurship has so many different faces and facets. And so that was another thing. And then we also wanted to acknowledge that people are very diverse in their interests. So making sure that we also had fashion content, also had automotive content, lifestyle content, because people, just because you work in finance, it doesn't mean that you're not going to be interested in fashion and vice versa. So really that was kind of the start of an 8-year journey. And now we are called Glory Media. We used to be called Bay Street Bull. And really we are trying to really be the embodiment of what a modern media company looks like today. And that is operating in many different kind of mediums, connecting with your audience through experiential, basically also just not putting all our eggs in one basket, because we don't want to be beholden to all of our advertisers and partners who can be very fickle sometimes. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, my journey so far.
On one hand, why I'm so excited for this interview is Glory is, I feel like, doing everything at all times. Like, it's just overwhelming how much is happening at Glory Media. And listening to your story, it makes way more sense because you've been someone that's constantly been ahead of the curve. Like, that's where your career started. So it's really cool that I got to be able to make that connection by hearing your story.
Thank you.
On another, like, when you're talking about that intersection of culture, fashion, and probably really luxury and the business space, makes perfect sense when you think about the psychology of marketing, right? Like when these big brands want to come into the Canadian market, and they typically aren't Canadian brands, and they want to reach that target market persona of a high net worth individual, how do they do that? And that's where you guys have been a conduit for years now to kind of to bridge that gap, because it was hard to do that in a way that was organic, that was kind of community building. And that's what to me is so cool about Glory Media is you guys are also making waves into the US. So it's no longer kind of just like a Canadian kind of magazine, but you feel more indie than like the Vogue or the Elle, which to me feels old and like outdated, and you guys are just like ahead of the curve.
Yeah, well, thank you. We've always really adopted kind of an underdog mindset and a small business mindset, which in every aspect we still are. Like we're a very, very small team, and we're always trying to be nimble. We're not a legacy company like kind of the bigger legacy media companies here or in the US, so we don't have that long history of business where we can rely on our brand equity and our brand history for our audience to be familiar with. We're really kind of starting from scratch with a lot of our audiences, and now even more so because we've done a rebrand. But, it's really interesting because from the get-go, we've always had kind of a few different pillars that have informed everything that we do. One of them is highlighting Canadian excellence. And that is not just within, that's not for the sake of highlighting Canadian excellence. It's because we believe that Canadian talent is among the best talent in the world. We have world-class talent. We have world-class companies. Toronto, the city that we live in, is a world-class city along with other cities in Canada. And so we're not trying to showcase Canadian talent for the sake of it, nor are we trying to do it within a silo. And so we don't want to build a space where we're talking about Canadian success in a vacuum. We want to also be talking about international success stories in the States or in Europe alongside those Canadian stories, because that's how we reposition our audience's minds around what it means to be successful, but also Canadian. And also when we talk to Americans, we don't want to, and Canadian culture, I mean, this is a conversation that we have with a lot of our guests and interview subjects, is like, especially if they're Canadian, is like, what does the Canadian mindset around ambition and like stumping for yourself mean? And historically and typically, I think Canadians have been very humble and have not really like championed ourselves in a way that we see our neighbors to the south. Not that we need to, but I also think that we can be a little bit more celebratory of our successes and not have to really try to downplay those things. So that's all part of that same conversation, and trying to also highlight, big entrepreneurs like, last year we interviewed Oliver El-Khatib from OVO, who has built up a global brand and community with Drake. We also worked with Rami Atala from Essence, who has built up a global e-commerce and technology and fashion giant.
Yeah.
So these are companies that have a global footprint, but have also made it their mission to stay within Canada to also help create that groundswell. So it's really, really important for us to not just focus on Canadians, but also other success stories, because we are doing that alongside Canadian success stories.
It's really interesting. I read in a book that kind of talked about that difference between culture of Canadian versus American. And what it said, and it stuck with me, in the US, the rivers run east-west. And in Canada, they tend to run north-south. And topography, our geographics in Canada are very difficult to get across from east-west. So going back, you couldn't easily travel from Ontario to BC. There was mountain ranges, and it was very hard to travel. So because of that, the Canadian culture, there was a larger dependence on your neighbor. There was less of a focus on individualism, because you had to rely on your community in case we had a massive snowstorm and you couldn't get something. You had to kind of have more of that community mindset. So that kind of the me first, or like really pushing yourself that you see in the States, it didn't work when you were going back through generations.
Yeah.
So I thought that was just an interesting
for sure
point for when you because there are cultural differences, and I find it's very difficult for the luxury brands to navigate Canadian culture. Like we have a high net worth population, like per GDP we have a lot of millionaires. Canadians are quite successful. Our education system is great. Obviously, there are still problems with them. But from a brand's perspective, when they're looking at where to invest, they're investing a big proportion into Canadians. But culturally, we're very different than the South. So,
and also regionally too. I mean, I would say
totally,
that the thing that sometimes I think brands kind of don't understand when they're first launching into Canada is, one, how massive our country is.
Oh, yeah.
But we're only 10% of the population in the States.
Yep.
And so the density in comparison to their home markets, if it's an American brand, is not there. And so when you're talking about our population here in Toronto versus Calgary or Vancouver, Montreal, literally hours away and a whole country away, and the density is just not there. So sometimes that also makes a big impact. And also when we have conversations with our audience or even my peer groups, a lot of Canadians have not had the ability to discover their own country because it's so big.
Totally true.
And it's easier for them to go down to the South or to Europe and
Florida.
access culture that way too, and not our own culture.
Yeah.
So, that's just part of it. And our population's a lot smaller, but from a proportional standpoint, like we have some really incredible stories and talent, and we're
beyond.
Yeah. And I think there's just so much room for growth, and we're just scratching the iceberg right now.
Oh, totally agree. And also too, what's really interesting is how culturally diverse we are as a country, where there's so many micro nuances between cultures, and like how brands need to kind of tap into that and to understand not only what it means to be Canadian, but what it means to be where your family might be from, Canadian, right? Like I think that's a really cool thing in Canada is when you ask, a friend, where are you from? The assumption isn't just that you're born here. It's also, we want to talk about your family's history. Where do you identify your kind of your cultural practices with? Where do you consider yourself kind of be from, which is very different than our friends in the South.
Yeah, and I would say that that's a huge strength of ours, because for a country as young as ours, relatively speaking.
True. Yeah.
We ask a lot of our guests what their perspective is on the Canadian identity and how that's informed by a nation that is composed and comprised of so many identities. But that's just what it is that our identity is built into a foundation of many identities, and that is our strength. And what that gives us is a diversity of perspectives, a diversity of tactics and strategies and abilities to solve problems. And this is the conversation that we've been having with businesses
and brands
about diversity and the strength that it has to help you solve problems and have different perspectives, all that stuff. And so Canada really is a nation. Canada's identity is built in the fact that we have many identities.
It's a mosaic.
Yeah.
That's what we were taught in school. We're a mosaic. We're not a melting pot, which is what makes Canada so cool. When you were kind of explaining how Glory sees itself as an identity and kind of approaching it, made me think, are you Lance, the Canadian Anna Wintour?
I would definitely not say that. That's very, very flattering. I mean, she's obviously had such an incredible impact on media and culture
Fashion
in general.
And culture, totally.
Yeah, I think what we're just trying to do is just be a reflection of what's out there, and our tone of voice is very much not in the spirit of punching down. We are very celebratory in our tone of voice because I think that we just need more of that, and we are very much about showcasing the diversity of success stories and what success even means. Because, for one person, it can mean financial success. Another person, it can mean time, all that kind of stuff. And so we're really just trying to be a reflection of the community around us.
Yeah, so you guys do have a very positive message. When I read your magazine, or if I go onto your kind of your website, your online web portal, like it's very celebratory. Like it's not the clickbait headlines of kind of what you're used to, and where kind of more of that I almost want to call it like e-com, because they're selling kind of the clicks of like eyeballs and likes, but even though it is kind of it's supposed to be online reading. And I agree with you. I think that very much is your brand's tone. What's been cool too about trying to, if I can't quite put Glory and what you do as an editor-in-chief in a box, like you're hosting crazy events, you're creating relationships with the communities with massive artists and like brands and celebrities. You host a huge podcast that's like educating. Like you guys have been so ahead of the curve for so long. If we move into kind of that part of our conversation, I guess we can kind of start with explain all that you do, maybe as a starting point, so that we can like break down what you do.
I mean, just kind of going back to my note about embracing kind of like the mentality of a small business, is that on paper, I'm editor-in-chief and creative director, but in reality, sometimes I'm the coffee runner. Sometimes I'm a salesperson. That's actually a large part of my role, is like biz dev and sales. Sometimes I'm an editor. Sometimes feel like I'm human resources. So it really just depends on the day. And I think in terms of media and independent media, there's no church and state between roles anymore, especially for a small business. Any small business owner will understand that you have to wear so many different hats to run a business. And the benefit of that is that you get to have a very holistic understanding of how your business runs. And so if someone came up to me and asked me, about our sales funnel, I could answer those questions. If someone asked me about our design kind of ethos, I could answer that, because I've literally been in all those conversations and it's part of our responsibility. So, and that's the beauty of it. And also, if we have a staff member leave us, it doesn't impact our cadence and our stride, because we all have, our hands in every kind of bucket and understand how to keep the business going, because we have accumulated a very diverse skill set just by nature of being a small business. So I don't know if that answered your question, but basically we do everything. Everyone does a little bit of everything, essentially.
And when we think of products of kind of what Glory offers, what are the different categories of ways that brands or the public can interact with Glory?
So we originally started off with a single product, which was our print product, our hero product. Since then, we've diversified into multiple kind of product categories because the way that people access content and the way that we can distribute content has changed so much. So now print is more of like our cornerstone legacy product. It's our prestige product. It's not the product that's driving our business, but it is more symbolic for us now. We have a digital suite of products, obviously our site, we have a podcast, we have a video arm. We also have an experiential arm, which has, in the last few years, especially post-pandemic, been a huge part of our business because there is a hunger from brands and our audience alike to engage with each other and educate and experience different things. And connect, especially. So experiential is a huge part of our business. And then we also have a white label B2B portion of our business where we are utilizing our editorial know-how as well as our knowledge in production and our relationships with suppliers and distribution channels to create either an editorial product for a client that has nothing to do with us as a media company. We're just kind of being the engine that helps drive it.
Like what? Just so I can understand that clearer.
So, for example, we will work with brands to help them create their own magazine or, for example, a few years ago, we worked with Moet Hennessy and helped them create a coffee table book. They gave us a brief and we put everything together and just essentially create a turnkey solution because, one, a lot of teams are very... they're over capacity with the amount of work that they have. So they want to just outsource it to someone that they trust and will deliver a high quality product. And then two, they might not have the expertise or know how to even cultivate that kind of product if they did want to do it internally. So we are kind of essentially like an agency that helps them put these things together and bring them to life. And that also applies to the experiential portion, is that we'll help brands put on events, and it won't be positioned as a Glory Media event or a Glory with X brand event. It'll be their brand that is presenting the event, and we're the agency essentially behind the curtain that has helped put it together. And that's everything from guest list where we can tap into our database to supplier management like floors and catering to venue sourcing to X, Y, and Z. So that is another part of our business because we realize that that's a need and people don't have the time to do it themselves sometimes. So I think I've hit most of the things that we do.
All the things that you guys do.
Yeah, I think that's everything for now.
And you've also too because you built your own personal brand and become effectively an influencer in Toronto because you've also built a great reputation and reach in this city. So that's another thing just to while you're at it, another thing to focus on. But that to me was the most interesting vertical that I talk about a lot. The best marketing is simple. Like the best ideas are often simple, but like simple isn't easy. And that's where I first met you when you were hosting I'm totally going to pronounce it wrong because I learned at this event how to pronounce Maybach.
The Maybach. Mercedes Maybach, that event.
Which I was mind blown that it's pronounced Maybach because there's been so many hip hop or rap songs where they say Maybach and no one's corrected them.
Right.
But what I loved about, and I know you do this all the time, this was just the one that I was exposed to, is it's so brands want to educate, they want to explain and articulate their USP, their unique selling proposition, but it's so hard to do as it often comes out as an ad. And nobody connects with ads. So to educate your potential customer, is quite hard to do in an organic way. And that event among this service that you offer was so smart. This is also, by the way, not an ad for Glory. This genuinely I just found was fascinating. And I think there's a lot of business owners or brand managers that can learn from this. You obviously do it at the highest level, but just kind of tapping into the role that experience and education plays, and how that was a better way to educate in a meaningful way. And even what you did with the psalm you brought out, like, okay, so break that down, kind of the role between education and experience, and how that is helping kind of your brand customers.
Yeah, I think it really comes down to storytelling and alignment of values.
Yeah.
That's really the conversation we try to have with a lot of our brands. Some brands just want to, sell a specific campaign or product, and that's completely fine too.
Not as effective, but fine.
Yeah, and other brands want to kind of create a long tail storytelling arc that really involves, especially if it's like a heritage brand, talking about craftsmanship, talking about heritage. There's not a lot of brands that have been around for 200, 300 years. So they want to be able to really focus on that rich heritage, why their brand is, this goes back to us talking about excellence. It's not just excellence through the lens of like entrepreneurship, but also excellence through the lens of like product or service. And so why these brands are at the top of their category from a product or experiential standpoint. And then also sometimes it's like dispelling misconceptions about brands too, where we are having discussions right now with a lot of spirit companies. Say, for example, Scotch. They really want to get away from this stereotypical image where it's like an old man sitting in a room with a cigar and having
Leather
a
couch.
Scotch. Yeah, neat. And that kind of very boys club kind of drink. They're trying to get away from that and encouraging a conversation around, more women having Scotch and being visible in their ad campaigns and marketing campaigns, not always having to be so precious around your liquid. So, mixing it into cocktails, not always having to have a milestone to celebrate. You can also consume
Or a
Scotch.
stress point.
Exactly. And so it is really talking about also reframing a lot of the conversation that has been built over these years and adapting. So that's the other thing, is like a lot of brands are looking to shift the narrative around the perception of their category or the brand too. And so we try to help with that, and whether that's through an event or content or both, we try to create like a holistic kind of package for our partners. And that doesn't happen overnight. Like that's why we kind of prefer to have a long tail campaign with a partner to help kind of seed that story and those kind of discussion points throughout a year versus all at once, So that event that we had with Mercedes is an example of that. And they brought in an amazing sommelier, Chris, who was able to speak to, again, excellence and tastemaking and everything.
So
and obviously that's not a direct tie to the brand itself, but there is a reflection of shared values and shared storytelling, and that's where the connection was. And then it feels more authentic, and it feels more real, versus like, hey, buy this car, or hey, buy this bottle. Anyone can do that, right? So that's how we try to work with partners, is just to tell a story and connect with our audience and really try to encourage our brands to focus on what story they want to tell.
Do you have any footage of that video event that we could play on top of this? Because Chris is a sommelier, but really he's a storyteller.
Yeah.
And it was so captivating.
Mesmerizing.
Like,
he was
literally
great.
mesmerizing. Like, the whole room disappeared. Like, he had all of our full attention, and he turned wine into something that is far beyond liquid in a glass. And wine is such an interesting category because it shows you what good storytelling and branding can do, because there's like a whole vernacular around this liquid. But that was such a great addition to the event, because I will never forget it. And I love that you talked about the long tail and trying to communicate with your clients that you can't jam pack everything into a quarter to get the kind of that fast, like, quick hit results. It's like Maybach is a perfect example. Like the price point for that car is among the highest.
A lot.
Like a lot.
It's a lot of money. Yeah.
And they invested, I'm sure, a good chunk of change into that event. But in order to connect with their future customer, like I doubt that there was like an ROI coming straight out of that event. Like it was, there was no sales push. It was like, we're going to talk about the story. We're going to talk about the history. There's a car here, but we're not actually even going to tell you how much it costs, where to buy it, if you can even order it. We're going to bring in the best sommelier that's going to talk to you about a different part of the world than we're not even in right now. And we're going to tell you a story and take you out of this room so that you have a great evening. And it was, I think it also shows that sometimes when it comes to building a brand, businesses should have a different approach to brand building. Like it should almost be its own line cereal. Like it's not the same as like your ad budget, you know, because it's investing kind of long term.
Yeah, definitely. I also think, kind of just going back to our conversation around the price point of a Maybach, you know, a lot of the brands and advertisers that we work with are in that luxury space. Timepiece is our highest category of advertisers. And some of these brands, you know, their starting point for a watch is like $80,000. All to say, like, their audience is comprised of, you know, millionaires, sometimes billionaires, and these people are getting hit with all the same messaging from all of these luxury brands. They have access to all of the best experiences, invites to all these different things. And so really what differentiates luxury brand A from luxury brand B to this consumer that can afford any of these things, and it's desire, and that is rooted in like storytelling or an alignment of values, and that's really kind of where we try to help brands is, you know, these customers are used to being courted by so many different luxury brands, and so that real difference is that storytelling and that creating one unique experiences and then rooting that into storytelling as well.
And you don't have to be a luxury brand to be able to take away from luxury brand strategy, right? Like,
oh yeah, of course.
It doesn't matter what category you're in, like it's saturated, right? And making it cool, making it about the customer is always going to win. Like it just, your conversion metric or your KPI is just going to be different. And that's what's been really cool for me with working with kind of getting behind the curtain of these big fashion houses, is learning that they're actually, everything they do has no direct tie to a sale. Like they don't care if it results in a sale because they're just trying to keep brand equity. Like they want the Maybach to still be valuable 25 years from now. Like that's their KPI for that event, is that car or that name of the car, not the year of the car, is still going to be desirable when I have the money to be able to buy it.
Yeah, and a lot of these brands are trying to weave in that messaging with a millennial and now also like a Gen Z consumer, because they know that if they are able to kind of start telling that story and positioning themselves in these people's minds from kind of a relatively young start, then they can grow up with that aspiration in mind and brand recognition in mind too.
And to go back to like, you don't have to be luxury, I loved your podcast with the CEO of Skims. Jens Rede?
Yeah, Jens Rede.
Jens Rede?
Yeah.
Because it was so interesting that, and it makes perfect sense, like why Skims is so great has been their obsession on good materials, like a good piece of product. And their stuff's not cheap, but it's not luxury. You know, like it's very much, I would say, an affordable price point for the quality to be great.
Yeah.
What have you learned the most when it comes to kind of branding and marketing with more like those mid-tiers, so that listeners that aren't, you know, Mercedes can kind of have some cool takeaways?
I think what's interesting with those brands is not a lot of them are huge legacy companies too. And so they have the ability to really start on like kind of a fresh sheet of paper and be able to be nimble as well, because a lot of these legacy and heritage companies, they're so institutional and it's so hard and to make change and to be nimble, and there's a lot of red tape around what you can and can't do. And so for these brands that are mid-size and relatively new and are embracing that mindset of being nimble and agile, I think that it's what we can learn from them is listening to our audience and listening to the world around us. I had an interview recently with Leonard Brody, who started a company called Caravan that basically puts celebrities in touch with companies to invest in.
Great name.
Yeah. And so what I thought was really interesting from that conversation is that historically a lot of brands focused on the mindset of like exclusivity and like you can't access our club. We're kind of like the cool kids or whatever it is, right? Now, the conversation that we're having around brand building and community engagement is that the consumer is the superstar of the campaign. And you have to do everything you can to make them feel like a superstar. It's not necessarily just the celebrities anymore. And so there is a more democratic approach to building brands and to building community, where we don't have to kind of have the gates closed in order to kind of weave a story around aspiration and kind of like this closed off club. It is really what the brands are doing well now is making sure that their audience and their community is at the very center and focal point of everything that they do. And part of that is also being nimble and agile and being able to react to different pop culture or business kind of events that are happening out in the world.
You bring up two really great points that I haven't connected together, but you're so like, because digital it's so easy to do it. There's so much noise, and that's what most brands. I'm glad that it's kind of coming back to having its moment, because really it is, the customer is the hero, right? Like, it's gone are the days where you can. It's interesting because of where social media has gone, and I think we're actually now overwhelmed by socials. We're almost kind of wanting to pull back and see less ads, especially where the algorithm is going and changing, with it penalizing like the kind of the influencer ad type content. It was easier to put ads in users' faces, and now because we're so sick of it, it has to actually provide a benefit. Like, it has to be engaging. It has to be valuable. But on the other hand, you also have to be able to take, in quotations, a risk. And when I say a risk, it's only a risk because a lot of these traditional or legacy brands, they just want to follow their template of what worked. And we're moving so quickly that we want brands to be a reflection of where our lives are at. And that's why Skims is such a great example. It's like, they talk about being like everywhere at all times, like the NBA, the Olympics, the Sydney Sweeney, like the moment she's on season 1 of White Lotus, like it's so quick and so nimble, but they're taking risks in the sense that brands would be like, I don't know if I want to have White Lotus cast in my Skims campaign because they could next week be on the cover of a tabloids for X reason. Like, they wanted everything to be so perfect and manicured. And by not taking risks, you can't stay current. And we talked about this too offline of like, it's so funny too that these, I want to say print is dead, which you're okay with me saying, but it's so funny that these big companies, they have such a huge budget on print and they're so slow to change. Whereas like, I think Skims would be for them more a risk to like go back into print. Do you know, like, you know what I mean?
For us, on that note, prints, yeah, I mean, there's definitely no arguing that as digital has become more and more,
Print is sick. Not dead.
print is not feeling great. Print has gone down. And so for us, and it's a big line item on our balance sheet for sure, because the cost of paper has also gone up too.
Oh, yeah.
And the cost of distribution has gone up a lot too. For us, the reason why we still stay in that medium is, one, we have partners that will only advertise if you have a print product.
Yeah, their budgets
So
are
we need to
huge.
create a product. For us, the way that we talk about internally sometimes is like we need to make sure that we have enough products on the shelf for people to buy, enough items in the store.
Tick
And
their
so,
boxes too.
when a brand comes to us and asks if we have, this product that they can invest in, our answer should never really be no, because we should have, considered that into our business planning. But for print, the reason why we haven't folded that is because, one, our partners, some of them require it. Two, I think that there is still a prestige around a tangible
Yeah.
piece of print material. And I would be interested to see, I would wager that the majority of people that we talk to, if we gave them a choice between an online feature or a print feature, I think the majority of them would still say a print feature.
Yeah.
Because it's curated. There is still kind of like a specialness and a tangibility around it. It is focused. There is a lot of noise online, as you say. So at least in print, there is a start and an end with an issue. And whether that's a 100-page book, that all those pages in those book have been considered, have been curated, and have been focused to make sure that they are right for the audience. And so maybe that's part of it as well. But yeah, no, I would say, like, with all the pitches that we get and the opportunities that we have, I would be shocked if a brand or a person turned down a print feature. So there's still space in the market and in the mindset of our audiences for a print product. It's just changed.
Yeah.
Now, whether or not that'll stay around in the long term, I don't know. But we're now carving that out as more of like our niche kind of hero product. Not even hero, I should say. It's a symbolic product. It's kind of like the four corners of a puzzle piece for us, and everything inside that puzzle is our digital experiential. That's like really like the meat and bones of our company now. But we still need those four corners to complete the puzzle, right?
And also to like to position yourself as being an authority, right? Like when I think about not having print, you almost become a blog, and like the word blog almost it has less weight than a publication. And when I think about it, it's such an interesting internal dialogue, because like when I think of a brand like Rolex, it makes sense to me that if I opened up a Vogue at the airport, 6 pages in, I'm reminded of that like brand association, that people that read Vogue have Rolexes, and like it maintains that like mental aspiration for wanting a Rolex, and what that, and how you measure success by buying a product or a brand like Rolex. But it's so funny to me, because someone like Rolex should do that, can afford to do that. But when I also look at their distribution of budget by percentages, seeing behind the curtain, it's interesting that they have so much weight on print and events. Like events is massive. We also talked about too. I want you to talk about the sports trophies. I think that's a really interesting vertical. But then I'm trying to think of, where should they go? And I do think that it's, it is cheapening their brand if they went only digital. So it's complicated, but I think that where it becomes a bit difficult is when you're a smaller brand, you're an up-and-coming brand, and you're trying to learn from the classics or the greats, and you really can't take from them in a way that you can apply it to yourself. And that's where a brand like Skims is like, there's more to learn from them in their age than there is to learn kind of from a Rolex.
Yeah, I definitely think that for up and coming brands, you can definitely take notes from legacy luxury brands or legacy brands in general in terms of how to, build an exceptional product or service. But I don't know. I mean, it's not a black and white answer because there's obviously so many companies that are legacy brands that do a fantastic job of it and other brands that are completely like left behind in the past. But, all to say that you have to kind of be able to pick and choose which insights you want to glean from which kind of companies and at what stage they are in their journey as well. And so for these newer companies like Skims, the lessons that we can extract from that is in their ability to kind of tap into the cultural zeitgeist and capture those moments really well and be able to move on really quick. Like the speed at which they move with their marketing is, and obviously that's a product of Jens and his background, as well as the Kim Kardashian, who's an expert in marketing. Regardless of how you might feel about her as a person, there's no doubt that as from a marketing standpoint, has nailed it. And so I think those lessons can be extracted in terms of marketing, agility, being able to be nimble, and being able to just tap into a moment real quick. They've done that with like the White Lotus girls, with even like hinting into like nostalgia too, where like they had like Carmen Electra as part of their campaign.
Oh my gosh, yeah. All just the past supermodels, like
understanding their audience and what the audience values in terms of those messages and appreciates, even if most of their audience is like a Gen Z and has no idea who Carmen Electra is, there is like kind of that nod to nostalgia that's happening right now, especially like 90s, early 2000s nostalgia too, right?
Oh yeah. But I think even more than that, like what Skims is doing so well is they understand their target markets, like bracket S, so that when I ask for it on my Christmas list and my mom might follow them on Instagram and she sees I'm totally having what is the chick on America's Got Talent's name? Heidi Klum.
Yes.
Heidi Klum and like all of those iconic supermodels. Yeah. She's like, they look awesome. I'm going to buy myself pajamas. Right. And when my younger sister, it follows Skims, she's seeing the TV shows that she's watching and even being an NBA sponsor and with the NFL, like tapping into girlfriends have to watch what their boyfriends are watching, or women being in basketball and women being in football. Like she's just doing all the things, and it's so smart because on social media you can have those kind of sub markets. But I guess in this conversation, what's the most interesting of it being not black and white is why strategy is so important in branding, right? Is you can't have there's not a one size fits all. There's some brand houses where I've been like, I don't agree with this strategy because I don't feel like you have a brand anymore. And I think that just comes with, the different creative directors who's in the house and kind of like the brand status of the moment. Yeah. But there's other ones where, and that's why I used Rolex. I'm like, it's brilliant. And especially with what this intersection of fashion and sports, I think that's brilliant. Can you just give us a little bit of a case study or the 411 on what's going on there?
With what we're doing in that area, or just in general?
Both, yeah. In general, I think it's probably a good place to, because I thought that was fascinating with the cups.
Yeah, well, I think what's really interesting is that fashion has always had a relationship with sports. When you look back,
name the tennis bracelet.
Tennis bracelet. Sponsorship. You think about like David Beckham and Posh. It's always, those have been always in tandem with each other. And ebbs and flows. I think right now what's really interesting is we are seeing like kind of another big swell in that conversation and how those two worlds are intersecting, and the marriage of luxury and sports is really interesting, especially with the rise of social media too. You've got all these tunnel fits, and people and fashion brands that are outfitting entire teams. These
yeah.
are moments, these are marketing moments for sure. And so that is kind of like tapped into the zeitgeist. There's also brands that are behind the scenes, playing an instrumental role in the sports community, where you have a brand like Tiffany that is making all the hardware and the trophies for basically all of the major kind of sports competitions globally.
So smart.
The Larry O'Brien Trophy, so many. And then you also have Louis Vuitton that is, again, telling a story about their history as luggage makers. And now they're the ones that are creating the trunks and the cases for the trophies.
So smart.
And the bigger picture too is that they're part of the same parent company under LVMH. And so LVMH is also undergoing always shifting and always going through new leadership changes, but there's kind of like this new generation of people in the family that are leading the next generation of all these brands in their portfolio. And this is an interesting year for that too. We're seeing LVMH as a major sponsor of the Olympics in Paris 2024. And so we interviewed the designer for the torch, who has applied just like this beautiful aesthetic to the Olympic torch. And then you have a brand, Chalmé, they're the ones creating the medals, and their history is in creating tiaras for princess, like royalty, literally.
Wow.
So there is like this huge marriage between luxury and fashion and sports. You've also got like F1 that is growing in its kind of mass cultural appeal as well. So yeah, it's a really, really interesting dialogue that's happening. And we, from our standpoint as a media company, we're just trying to capture that and ask questions about kind of like, what does it mean? How does it speak to equity and values and the role that athletes play in that conversation? So it's a really interesting space to be in.
Also, like, the French just know how to brand.
Yes.
This is going to be a good Olympics.
I am interested to see how it is all presented in their opening ceremonies. I'm interested to see how that's going to go too.
Me
too. It's going to
is
be a show.
Crazy.
It's just going to be a big runway show full of athletes.
And all the brands that are going to it's going to be a marketing masterclass. I should do a breakdown live. But it's even interesting what you're saying. Like, when I look at, to go back to Skims, like, they foresaw all of this kind of intersection that's happening. Like, it shows you it's no mistake that they went into the NBA and the NFL.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And what you can take from that is you can see what's going on at the bigger picture and just do a smaller scale of what Skims did, because Skims is doing a smaller scale of what the big fashion houses brands are doing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's looking at how can you engage your brand with sports in a way that makes sense, like in a way that's kind of on brand.
Mm-hmm.
And not just doing it for the sake of it's a part of the zeitgeist. And really, like, strategy is kind of the key word of this sentence, so that it is aligned with your brand. But that's interesting that you're kind of seeing that kind of waterfall effect of like how you're doing it in a different way, and Skims did it in an all-American way.
Yeah. I also think that, whether we're talking about Skims or an established, like a heritage company, you can have the best marketing in the world and the best marketing strategy. At the end of the day, and this is kind of what we spoke to in that interview, you still have to have a great product and a great service regardless, because once kind of that honeymoon phase is done with a consumer and they've kind of bought into the product and bought into the brand because of the marketing, which has delivered them to the product, if it's not a good product or a good product experience, there's no sustainability. And so that consumer life cycle is not a one that's going to be sustained. And so at the end of the day, you still have to have a great product and a great value proposition for your consumers, whether it's a product or a service that you offer.
I so agree. I so agree. And I think there's a lot of brands that don't focus on that enough, where if you want to be here for the long haul, like, you have to focus on longevity, and it has to be a genuine care and product and experience and connecting with your story, like consistency. I talk about all the time, like the 4 I call it the 4 kind of corners to a great brand, and it's a great product, a great experience, a great story, and consistency. And that's a great product. Like you have to be great in all 4 of those corners to be sustainable.
Yeah.
I've been asking all of my guests this question. Lance, what is a brand to you?
What is a brand? Oh, okay. What is a brand? I think a brand is... I think our definition of a brand today, like a modern brand, is... Like, are you referring to like a good brand or like just a brand in general?
What is a brand? You can also answer what is a great brand, but it's a big question.
Yeah, I think a brand is a modern brand today that is doing a good job, at least, is one that knows how to engage with its audience, is self-aware, and offers a great product or service or value proposition for its audience. And then everything around that is window dressing and kind of the more nuanced parts of that conversation. I don't know if that answered your question.
Totally does. It's an answer. I'm collecting my
it's an answer,
answers.
yeah.
What is a business or a marketing book that changed your life?
Ooh, a business or a marketing book that changed my life.
Or one in each category.
I recently read a book last year, but I don't remember the author's name off the top of my head. But the name of the book is called The Psychology of Money.
Oh, Morgan Housel. Great
yes, book. I read it. Oh, no, sorry. I listened to it and I loved it so much that I then bought the book and read it as well. And I just feel like it provided a really refreshing perspective on how we talk about money. Yep. And it wasn't so much about here's how to invest your dollar, here's what to put it in, how to put it into ETFs. It wasn't anything tactical. It was really about reframing what it means to us and what our relationships with money mean. And that's different for everyone. So it was almost like a therapist, basically, in terms of just talking about or asking the reader to explore our relationship with money. And I thought that was really interesting and really refreshing. A lot of those books are a bit dry, and I thought that one kept me pretty engaged from both a reading and a listening standpoint. I listen to my audiobooks when I'm either going to the office or coming back from the office or at the gym. And if it can keep me engaged at the gym, then it's pretty good. So no, I really liked that book. That's probably the most recent business book that I read. But I loved that one.
And did you have any reads lately on like marketing or branding books?
Marketing or branding. Or what I've been reading a lot has been memoirs. And in some ways that has kind of played into marketing and branding, like personal branding too, and understanding people's respective journeys on building up their own personas and their own lives and kind of the intricacies around that. Not all of them are entrepreneurs or anything like that, but it is interesting to kind of see how people have kind of claimed a seat at the table and built up their personas and kind of the moments of celebration as well as the moments of the issues that they've had to navigate along the way. So they're not I would say hard marketing or branding books, but it is kind of a more nuanced way of understanding how these incredible people have built up their lives.
Totally, but give me a favorite.
Last year I read the Anna Wintour biography. That one I actually thought was a little bit dry. I really loved, there is a prolific food writer and editor named Ruth Reichel, and I read one of her memoirs about when she became the food critic at the New York Times.
Oh, cool.
At the same time as listening to her other audiobook about when she became the editor-in-chief of Gourmet magazine. And just kind of actually having that dual experience and reading and listening about two very different but simultaneous parts of her life. That was really, really fascinating because she was also kind of tasked with building out and quote unquote disrupting the food critics column at the New York Times, but also repositioning what Gourmet Magazine, a legacy brand, could mean for a new audience and be more inclusive. So I loved those books. I read a book, an autobiography by Andre Leon Talley.
Oh, great book.
Love that one.
Me too. I knew you were gonna love that.
I don't know if I extracted anything around like marketing or branding, but just that world that he lived in was just so incredible at that time as well.
Oh yeah. Especially all the characters that he was able to meet.
And like caricatures too. It was just such a impactful time in fashion and culture. What else did I read? I loved I read a lot of memoirs last year, for me at least, and those were the ones that kind of stuck out. And I just love food literature and food culture because it speaks to larger conversations around breaking bread, what we value, connection. How we connect with people at a dining table, or how we don't connect with people and eat on our own and stuff like that. So I think those are really interesting books to consume. But yeah, those are kind of my favorites off the top of my head.
You might find interesting to read or listen to. It was Anthony Bourdain's kind of like left hand. He was his like on the road kind of videographer and video editor, but because it was really the two of them, it was just like kind of Anthony Bourdain's shadow. And like that book was interesting because it was like almost like an indirect kind of memoir of what it kind of meant to be around Anthony Bourdain. But I also found really interesting in the Andre book was that Diptyque was Karl Lagerfeld's exclusive candle brand of choice.
Oh, I don't remember that part, but that does not surprise me. I mean,
he wouldn't use any other candle brand. It was just exclusively Diptyque, and he had like basically back then like an Amazon subscription with Diptyque. So that his house was, and all of his homes were like, it was only Diptyque. Like for you to like, it was so clear in the book that he had like a brand obsession with Diptyque, actually raised the status for Diptyque for me, because they don't market that or touch on that at all. Like it makes the brand cooler that they're so confident in their brand that they don't need to ride on the brand of Karl Lagerfeld, which is cool.
It's interesting books like that have these huge kind of pop culture figures and to an extent caricatures too, but just kind of like like how exacting their standards are. Whether that's like someone like an Anna Wintour, who is very, very business, to like a Karl Lagerfeld, to like Yves Saint Laurent. Like they all had, and like even kind of stories that you have around like celebrities today.
Extreme quirks. Like they're extremists.
Quirks, and like just like the standard of excellence that they expect of themselves as well as their teams around them. And obviously that gets to a point where it can be quite toxic, but it is interesting kind of peeking into those worlds for sure.
I agree. And I think it's actually refreshing for millennials and Gen Zs to be reminded of that. Whether or not it's healthy is kind of a separate conversation and topic, but what's required to get there, and kind of what that looks like, because we can glorify the end result. And I see a lot of companies do this with big brands, like they'll look at where Yeti is now. Funny example to compare to Anna Wintour, but like they'll look at where Yeti is now and they try to put that in a vacuum, and they're not looking at the 14 years it took to get there. Or for Anna Wintour, you can't just be like, I want to be the next. Like Anna Wintour is where she is because she's 62 or like whatever she is.
Well, it's also contextual, like the time frame that she built up her career. It was a very different time now.
Totally.
No social media. Digital was, publishing and media was different. Luxury was different. And so it's hard to kind of really say that you want to be the next Anna Wintour or you want to be the next, X, Y, and Z, because the context is so different. The landscape is so different. The world of commerce is so different. And so I think you can appreciate and want to achieve that level of success, but it's just different times.
It's apples to oranges. I totally agree. And in some ways with what you're saying, it's not even really a comparison to want.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like for her to have gotten where she was, she had to step on a lot of backs. You know, she had to have a very tough personality and be difficult, because it's really effing hard to get to the top. It's, you can build your own community now and communicate and effectively sell your opinion, your curation of whatever you want it to be to a subset where you don't have to kind of rise to become the biggest. Or what is her official role at Vogue? Is it editor-in-chief?
She's editor-in-chief of Vogue, but I think she's also artistic director of Condé Nast overall.
Yeah.
So obviously a lot of influence. Yeah.
Well, I have loved this conversation with you, Lance.
Thanks for having me.
Man,
so fun.
This was so good. I feel like I could talk to you for hours. If anyone is wanting to follow you and learn more from you, where can they find you?
Yeah, you can find me personally at Mr. Lance Chung on Instagram, but also you can find Glory Media online, www.glory.media. And then we have our sub brands on social media. So Glory Professional, Glory Sports, and Glory Upgrade on Instagram. And you can find us at our parties.
And your podcast, because it's super interesting.
Yeah, our podcast, Mission Critical, on all the usual platforms. And we focus on not just entrepreneurs, but also cultural leaders, community impact leaders, and really what their career journeys have looked like, but also what their mission and purpose is, what the bigger picture is. And so that is what we're working on.
Awesome. It's so nice having you, Lance.
Thanks so much. I loved it.